Good afternoon. Welcome to our scheduled Budget Committee meeting. This is our regular meeting for September 23rd. We have a quorum of council members joining me on the dais. My name is Lene Palmisano. I chair this committee, and with me are council members Alondra Cano, Andrea Jenkins, Steve Fletcher, Philippe Cunningham, Jeremy Schrader, Lisa Goodman, and Council President Lisa Bender. We are a quorum of this committee and can formally receive and file all of these department budget presentations. Today, we'll be receiving budget briefings and presentations from CPED, from Community Planning and Economic Development Department, and also our Reg Services Department. Before I welcome them up, I did want to mention that late last week, I received a request from the Council Vice President that we work to reschedule the Coordinator's Office's presentation that was originally set for Thursday, and we are backfilling that with smaller departments that don't have any change items, and I think would be generally seen as having non-controversial budget requests. So that includes 311, internal audit, MBC, I think, and a couple of others. I will get you that rundown. Oh, here it is, actually. We could not move the Public Works Department budget, but we do have the Coordinator's Office fully moved. So we'll be doing 311, 911, the Office of Emergency Management, internal audit, the City Assessor, and Public Works on Thursday. And the website, if it isn't already updated, will be updated sometime today. With that order of presentations. If you have any questions or thoughts about that, please reach out to me, but I'm glad that we were able to accommodate the request as given. So with that, let's go ahead and start with Community Planning and Economic Development. We have with us today some of the department leadership, and Director Frank, I'll presume that you'll introduce everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Palmisano and committee members, council members. I'm David Frank, the director of CPED, and we are pleased to be here today to present the mayor's recommended 2020 budget for our department. I am joined by the department leadership team, as the chair noted, Eric Hansen, our director of economic policy and development, Andrea Brennan, our Housing Policy and Development Director, Steve Poore, our Development Services Director, Heather Worthington, our Long Range Planning Director, and Karuna Mahajan, our Operations Director. And I know we are joined on the broadcast by many of our colleagues back at Crown Roller Mill, at Public Service Center, and at Aldrich. Thanks to many of them for the work they put in to make this presentation and our budget recommendation happen, and to all of them for the great work they do serving the residents and businesses of Minneapolis. Our department's mission is to grow a vibrant, livable, safely built city for everyone. We will tell you today about the great work that CPED does and the recommended funding to support that work. And of course, we'd like to remember and hope that you remember that it's all about the people we serve, the businesses we assist, and the people at CPED who do the work. Our current department FTE count is 251, and we are recommending one additional FTE I will describe. Our recommended Department 2020 budget is $131.4 million, which includes $105.8 million current service level and $25.6 million in 18 proposed enhancements, change items, which I will describe, compared to an adopted 2019 budget of $130.9 million. Madam Chair, I'll just, as in previous years, I'll pause in between, and if you or your colleagues have questions, I trust that you'll let me know.
Thank you. Also, I'm still getting speaker management up on my computer, but my colleagues have them up, so you can reach out through your flag or speaker management, whatever's easiest. Thanks.
I'll describe our recommended change items organized by CPED division. First is Economic Policy and Development, represented by Director Eric Hansen. Economic Policy and Development works with businesses to start, stay, and grow in Minneapolis, helps make sure Minneapolis residents are competitive for jobs, ensures the safety, health, and livability of our community through regulation, enforcement, and education, and provides entrepreneurs and business owners with valuable information and resources to plan, launch, and grow a business. The first of 4 change items targeted to cultural districts within our recommended budget for next year is the Commercial Property Development Fund. As you can see, it's $2.5 million one time. This is long-term financing for commercial properties, either acquisition or rehab, with no payments until the property is sold or changes use. It seeds a program which we envision as also including private funding, meaning not just city funding. And there is some interest in that already from the outside community. This program was developed by our division based on needs identified from the community, and we think it's a great tool that we don't have at the moment to help launch businesses. I'll note that I've mentioned cultural districts, and I'm expecting I may take some questions on those, but this is the first of 4 items in the budget that we'll recommend to support that effort.
We do have a couple of questions. Did you want them, Councilmember Cunningham and then Bender?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Frank. I have 2 questions. The first is, what was the process of designating cultural districts, and what cultures are identified, I would say, within that as well?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, great question. We have been working both as staff and together with community members who were invited in the first place, and then were asked and encouraged to bring other community members together to be part of this discussion to help, in our initial conception, identify for us what they, the community, thought should be the cultural districts. They asked us in turn, I'm simplifying here and condensing greatly, let me know if I'm not answering your question. They said to us, yes, but you're the experts. You tell us which are the geographies that should be cultural districts. There's been some more data-driven research that city staff has done, and then I believe as part of the mayor's address recently, he identified a series of them, which I happen to have written down here: West Broadway, East Lake, Cedar Riverside, 38th, Franklin, and Central, 5 or 6. And at least in the mayor's conception, those are 6 blocks long each, unclear to me how deep at the moment. In the spirit of telling you a story and not being able to answer your question as directly as maybe you meant it, it started out as us asking the community, tell us what you think, turned into the community saying, you tell us what you think, experts, and the mayor has designated or named the ones that I just mentioned. I hope that's responsive.
Yes, I will just point out that, well, first I'll ask who. We talk about community and they being the community. Who is that?
Well, Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, I think you mean the question specifically, and there's a list I don't have here with me of who is invited to the first meeting, but it was representative groups from many of the geographies that I just mentioned, and they gave of their time, came in the middle of a work day, and said, boy, we're not sure we can keep doing this for a long, long time. Why don't you make a recommendation to us and then we will respond. But I can come up with the list. I don't have it here.
Thank you. I would appreciate it. I feel pretty certain, though, that probably not a lot of folks from Ward 4 were engaged, and that's okay. This is a part of the challenge that we have. When you look at the various designations of cultural districts, whether they're explicitly listed here or the mayor included them, it really covers, I would say, every major ethnic group, marginalized identity in the city, except for Southeast Asian. And so I just wanted to name that, particularly with Lowry, that is more than likely the largest density of Southeast Asian businesses. In Minneapolis, I would be willing to debate, argue for. So I just wanted to name that for my colleagues to take into consideration, that we have that lack of representation. within cultural districts, and that there is more in North Minneapolis than just West Broadway, and we do have challenges further north of that as well. My last question is, what are the criteria for qualifications to access these dollars aside from being a cultural district?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, the Commercial Property Development Fund should, now that the mayor has recommended it, and should the council approve it, we will develop the program guidelines and then be back before the Economic Development and Regulatory Services Committee with our recommended guidelines for how it would work, how much money per investment, what are the specific repayment terms. So at the moment, they don't exist. We would develop an application process, and we would come to the council requesting approval of our recommendation.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to divert over to our director of the budget, Director Intermill. Did you want to clarify or note some of this money being available outside of cultural districts?
So, Madam Chair, thank you. In the mayor's recommendation for the Commercial Property Development Fund, $500,000 of the $2.5 million is available for businesses outside of the cultural districts. Just to follow up on the council member's question.
Thank you. I thought that was worth noting. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And maybe I'll just have one question that I think applies to all four of this group of proposals, but maybe I will also note that I got the chance to learn a lot about San Francisco's cultural districts, and I think they're a really great model that others may have really dove into. I'm not involved in this initiative in any deep way, but as the president of the council, I would suggest that San Francisco established their cultural districts via resolution, and then they did a really deep community process to establish the priorities for each of those separate cultural districts, and those are emerging. Their program is just about a year old, so I think we can, probably others have, but all of us I think could learn a lot from their experience. Because again, it seemed very community driven in the fact that the districts that were very distinct and the goals and the things that were happening in each of the districts seemed very distinct to the particular geography. My question was about the overall goal of the council really focusing on anti-displacement strategies, and to the extent that we are able to influence wealth building and community and anti-displacement strategies, how we've thought about making sure that these funds and investments are helping with anti-displacement investment and not with displacement or gentrification or whatever word folks want to use to describe the idea of outside money coming in and then, not benefiting the folks who are really in the community or the low-income people of color that we really want to help build wealth.
Madam Chair, Council President Bender, the goals, as I understand them, of cultural districts echo what you just said. It is advancing racial equity, preventing displacement, fueling business and job development, and on and on. And in the development of the guidelines for this program, should it be approved by the council for next year, we would do our very best to come up with what the guidelines would be to support investments that accomplish all these things, certainly with displacement top of mind, anti-displacement top of mind.
Thank you, that's helpful. I guess I would just comment that I think that is a reasonable answer for the point of the process that we are in now, but I do think, at least for me, the idea of investing a pretty significant amount of money would require those things to be in place before we started spending the money. And so I just want to make sure that that's not sort of like an afterthought, or that we really meaningfully do want to build in that anti-displacement lens and those particular tools, which I think are challenging from the very beginning. And I know other council members have been working on this. So.
Thank you. Council Member Jenkins, and then Kano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to speak a little bit to some of the concerns that Councilmember Cunningham and Council President Bender raised. And just certainly, there's been some pretty, I would say, deep community engagement up to this point. I think we've had 60 various community members from representative organizations. And so, those folks were coming to the table representing broader groups of people. And we were looking at sort of historically marginalized communities that tended to have a cultural and or racial identity connected to them for long periods of time. So really baking in and even coming up with this whole concept as a means of I think creating and supporting anti-displacement efforts and really trying to help those communities be a part of the revitalization of these cultural corridors in order to stabilize and maintain those communities as opposed to creating displacement. And so I would say that is at the heart of the work, and we've certainly been looking at San Francisco and many other models, but I think San Francisco has been one of the models that we've really been focused on because they have started to formalize that process, even though I would say San Francisco and many other parts of the country have, including Minneapolis, has had informal cultural districts. We just certainly haven't really codified and really created supportive mechanisms to help those communities. And so this is a process in order to, I believe, really formulate our supports for these communities and include communities' voices into that process. And I think there's a very similar process going on to one of our biggest cultural corridors, the Upper Harbor Terminal, which, and I think the term cultural is sort of loosely used to refer to ethnicity as well as art or food culture. I mean, it embodies a wide range of culture, as it were.
Councilmember Kano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I wanted to add a couple of things here that are coming to mind here as we're having this conversation. It's important to note that the process for putting this together is still developing this year, and we're hoping to have some concrete proposals for council members to respond to before the budget votes happen in December. And so one thing I wanted to mention is that the feedback that council members are providing today are certainly being captured by city staff, and we're going to be meeting as a steering committee on Monday. But as we're chatting here, I'm trying to also keep an eye on the fact that we're also working to schedule a broader policymaker update on this, so there can be more conversations between us around the future and near-term next steps in cultural districts. So I'm wondering if, Heather, would you feel comfortable, David, would you feel comfortable sharing the space with Heather so maybe she can brief us a little bit on what we're anticipating to get done yet this year? We just had a steering committee meeting about 2 weeks ago and talked about our short-term goals for the next 3 to 4 months here with some anticipated next steps for next year. So if you feel it's appropriate, I think it would be nice to have Heather just kind of briefly mentioned what some of those things are. And in relationship to the conversation about community involvement, we've had maybe 3 large community engagement sessions with 50 plus folks in various parts of Minneapolis. And we do have a list of the people that were invited to that, and we can share that with everyone as well as add folks to the next round of information information that will be going out to that group of stakeholders. And in general, the feedback was twofold. One, there was a level of frustration from community members that the council hasn't acted fast enough on this, and that we continue to drain the community intelligence on these issues without taking action that is meaningful and tangible. And so some folks were just frustrated of being in the room again, asked for input on something that for them seemed really clear and direct. And then other community members just wanted to see, 2 years plus of community engagement on this, robust community meetings, more discussions before decisions were made. So I think we as elected officials have to figure out how we set the tenor and tone of this process. But just wanted to briefly share that that's the general bucket of feedback from these engagement sessions. So Heather, if you may.
I'm happy to answer any specific questions. I'll just say that to this point, all we have done is research and data gathering with regard to cultural districts in other cities. We've produced a draft report that we're happy to share. It is a draft. And then we're in the process right now of developing criteria for those cultural districts to be established and for them to access the resources that are set aside for the 2020 budget as proposed by Mayor Fry. And the idea behind that is that you're leveraging existing resources and providing some new resources. Those are not necessarily tied to a specific cultural district, as David mentioned, but there are some cultural districts that the mayor has called out in his budget address, and we're working with that list currently. Happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do just want to then ask this question maybe more clearly than I did before, either for today or before we are asked to approve the budget, which is, will we be able to have examples of specific anti-displacement tools that we will be using by the time these funds are ready to be spent? Or are we at too early of stage in the process to know what those tools might be?
Madam Chair, Council President Bender, the answer to that question is yes, right? So the way we have been conceiving of it is that if and when the council adopts something like this, that then our next step would be to write the program guidelines and bring it forward to council for approval. And only with those in place, approved or approved as amended, would we be prepared to spend the money. So yes, you'll have a chance to review and approve the guidelines before we spend the money.
It seems that in the past, a lot of the things that we want to do are preempted by state law or have other barriers. So I just want to make sure we're building in the time to make sure that we have meaningful tools.
Thank you.
Continuing on. Okay. Next is the Great Streets Real Estate Gap Financing. The recommendation is for $500,000 of CDBG program income one time. We are asking to replenish the source because we have been using it. It has been and will continue to be used also for our Grow North program and for the CDBG portion of BTAP, or Business Technical Assistance Program. So it's written as Great Streets Real Estate Gap Financing, and it is certainly that, but it is also for those other components that we fund with CDBG. The second of 4 change items related to cultural districts is an expansion of the Great Streets Facade Program, and this is to spend $200,000 one time to include building systems inside targeted areas. So as the facade program name suggests, typically and to date, we only have money available to spend on the outside of the building. Frequently what happens, especially in areas of concentrated poverty, is we start working with a building owner and we find out, yes, but it's nice that you're here to pay for the storefront and tuck pointing the bricks, but the mechanical system doesn't work, and that's a challenge as I'm trying to lease out the space. So this money would be targeted in targeted areas to also pay for building systems, and only in those areas. I just want to take a moment to say we are also exploring, we've spoken to some of you about the program match requirements, because we have heard from the community that some of our match program requirements are challenging. And so as part of our look this summer and fall at all of our economic development programs, we're evaluating the match as well.
We have a question or comment from Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Frank, this is kind of the kind of thing that leads me towards the concern about displacement. So you have a property owner who's been there forever, who hasn't taken care of their building, who leases to a tenant who's a cultural organization, and now we're helping them fix up their building, which will then result in higher rent and or removing the tenant. Is there a way to target this in such a way that would only be for people who own their buildings who operate those kinds of businesses? I mean, I feel like what it's doing is helping slumlords fix systems that then turn around and kick out. I mean, just look at I can give you a dozen examples, but I'll give you the one that's on my mind today, which is my friend who owns, and she's Philippe's Cunningham's constituent, who owns the Goddess of Glass, who lost her lease. So she's done something amazing. She's created this artist studio, and now she's lost her lease and didn't have anywhere else to go. So, I mean, that would be like the perfect building that we would have helped to upgrade the systems, and then the landlord kicks out the Goddess of Glass and jacks up the rent and puts someone else in. How do we avoid that kind of thing happening?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Goodman, great question. I'll remind us that we don't, as the city, directly invest in the facade improvement program or business district support. We do a competitive RFP for culturally aware neighborhood nonprofits who are the ones who disperse these funds. So we sign agreements after selecting them, and then they make these investments. We can and will certainly look into how to prevent what you're describing. Our sense over the past years of doing the facade work, not with the systems money attached, has been that that's not been as much of a concern because of the mechanism we use to disperse the money, but we'll note the comment and look into it.
So, Madam Chair, that's great. But I would guess if I had asked for a staff analysis, which I would not ask for, of all of the Great Streets money that's been spent over time, I would guess many of those buildings have been sold over time once fixed up. I don't even want to know what the number is. It scares me to think about it. But I would guess that 100% of the people that we loan money to for facade improvement programs have not kept the buildings. Because once artists come in and then make the neighborhood better, South Nicollet, Franklin to the highway, I was pointing at parts of Loring Park, immediately there's a sale, and then there's gentrification. And I just worry, I'm not, obsessed with it, but I do think that there's legitimacy to this idea of business gentrification. And we should be careful that we're not doing something to assist. And I would also say we should force those building owners to match. We're not asking the businesses to match. We're asking the people who own the property to match, and we're giving them money to improve their property. They darn well better be matching the funds. And if they pass it on to the businesses, even worse.
Thank you.
I think we'll just take that as a comment unless you want to.
Thank you. Sounds good. Next is to expand the small business team. This is the one FTE we have recommended for 2020. As well as the ongoing cost. This is more resources, more liaison resources within the small business team, that we think very successful and very well utilized small business team. And we think it would serve about 500 more businesses per year to add this additional liaison position. The third of 4 change items targeted to cultural districts is this one, which is the Cultural District Arts Fund, $100,000 one time. This money would be run through our Great Streets Business District Support Program, and it would be additional money named to be used for things like murals and arts programming activities in cultural districts. So as I mentioned just a moment ago, when our business district support, we select the local nonprofits and neighborhood organizations, business associations, who disperse this money, and this would be an additional and targeted eligible use in our upcoming competitive round. Tech hire, the request for $250,000 one time. This is more internship and training for participants. This addresses workforce gaps for employees of color at tech companies. Since 2015, just to impress you with a few numbers here, we've invested over $1.5 million in dedicated MSP tech hire and local adult program funds. We've leveraged $600,000 from other sources too, as well as dislocated workers and WIOA. And this funding has provided 177 full scholarships for IT training. The scholarship recipients are all low-income Minneapolis residents, nearly 100% women or people of color. And the outcomes for this group include a higher rate of 86% and an average wage gain of $13.90 per hour. Some 1,600 people have completed Tech Hire, including both the scholarship people I'm mentioning and others, of which 45% are people of color, 31% women, and the average wage gain for that group is $9.42. The fourth of the 4 change items targeted to cultural districts is the Co-op and Employee Owner Opportunity Fund. This is $100,000 one time. And it's the answer to the question, so I've taken the Cooperative Technical Assistance Program training, and I want to do it, but I have costs that I don't know how to pay for. This is for the preparation and transaction costs to create or convert to worker-owned co-ops or other employee ownership opportunities, and particularly for businesses located in cultural districts. This one is additional funding for Village Financial Cooperative as they continue to grow as the only Black-owned credit union in the city. This request is for $500,000 one time. I'm going to change divisions here from Economic Policy and Development to Housing Policy and Development. And that's, of course, represented by Director Andrea Brennan. Let me just talk high level for a minute. The city's housing challenges are complex and dynamic, and the city embraces a robust set of broad strategies, including investment, policy, public-private partnership, innovative new programs, and tenant supports. Just want to name for you the 7 strategies that we are currently using. Increase the supply, diversity, and affordability in all neighborhoods. Affordable housing production and preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing, improving and sustaining access to home ownership, especially among low-income renters, people of color, and indigenous people, supporting renters, preventing and ending homelessness, and maximizing public land resources to achieve city housing and equity goals. So all the things I'm going to mention for the rest of my time in front of you are on those strategies and to achieve those goals. First is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund of $9.8 million. This is the change item, $9.8 million, including some one-time money and some $50,000 ongoing. And this is above a $7 million base. So we're recommending $17 million total, including the base and the change item for 2020, compared to $21 million in current year. And this, of course, helps us meet our Met Council goals, and this is one of our main drivers of affordable housing production.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What are the criteria for projects to qualify for Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars?
Do you want to talk for a minute?
I understand. I would just like a high-level overview for the record.
Thanks.
Director Brennan, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Cunningham, the key criteria is that the units that are produced with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund have to be rental units, affordable to and occupied by households with incomes at or below 50% of the area median income. So that's the key requirement. I think as of now, there's a minimum sort of number of units that is required, and that's 10 units, I believe. So any residential development that have 10 or more units, where 20% of the units at least will be affordable at 50% of area median income. So that's the general project criteria. The units themselves have to be affordable in order to get any kind of public finance. So, the minimum is 20% of the units have to be affordable at 50% of area median income, but only those 20% would then be eligible for financial assistance. There's a whole host of other competitive criteria. So these funds are awarded pursuant to a request for proposals that's issued annually. And every year we bring to the City Council what our proposed criteria for that competitive funding is. And but what I can tell you is that for the last several years, the priority has been projects that serve extremely low-income households, so households earning at or below 30% of area median income, projects that serve households who are experiencing or are at significant risk of experiencing homelessness, households that serve other sort of higher need populations. So there's a lot of there's a long list of competitive criteria that projects have to compete for.
Great, thank you. I think that it's important for folks to understand. A lot of my constituents don't understand that our low density area doesn't have a lot of projects that happen that qualify for this money. So I just want to make sure that there's that clarification for folks, because we have low density. We don't have a lot of projects of 10 units or more. And so folks, when we think about investment in areas where there is concentrated poverty, not all of us have higher density. So just wanted to make sure I said that for the record. Thank you.
Great. Naturally
Wait, I'm sorry. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, is there any, the area median income is a statewide number, I believe, and I'm wondering, do we have any control over our particular region, which I'm sure is probably different from other parts of the state?
Madam Chair, Council Vice President Jenkins, the median family income numbers that we use are for the 7-county metro area. So you'll sometimes hear people talk about for Minneapolis or even for North Minneapolis at some meetings I've been to. But the accepted statistical measure and the one I believe we use in our programs is for the 7-county metro.
Okay. But that's static, though. We don't have any control over its variability.
Madam Chair, Council Vice President Jenkins, it varies, I believe, annually. What does not change is that the measure is the 7-county metro area. The number itself does change. As incomes in the region, the 7-county metro, go up and down, median family income would go up or down.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Can you just remind me, because it's not on here, what was the 2019 number?
Excuse me.
For the
Madam Chair,
Councilmember
Fletcher, for the trust fund.
Yeah.
Let's see. Last year was 21 million, and this recommendation would set next year's at 17 million, including both ongoing funding and the one-time that was approved by the council in the last budget for current year, and that we're recommending to be approved by the council for next year. 17 versus 21.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to note, I think it's, while much of that conversation might need to happen for time outside of these meetings, I think it's good for council members to pause, especially for making a significantly much larger investment in a particular thing, to say, is the way this is being spent really in line with our priorities, and do we want to revisit that either now, or especially for the council members who are not on the committee where the policy details will come from, provide some high-level direction. And for example, I think all of our projects are at 30 years of affordability. I've kind of always wondered if there's more we could do to extend that time frame. I know St. Paul is doing a 40-year deal. We have that, it is in our policies, but if we aren't getting any, for example, maybe council members want to look at, can we get longer-term affordability, or how is it affecting different parts of the city? I mean, we are at a point where we are, the property tax burden on our community is straining people's ability to pay their housing costs. And so I think for those of us who are in communities where these increases in property values are straining households' ability to pay their housing costs, like, these are good questions to be asking. Are we just taxing people here, and how is it being spent? So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next is an investment in naturally occurring affordable housing. We're recommending $3 million one time, which would continue the amount of funding in 2019. It would split as current year between Preservation Fund and the small medium multifamily pilot, no longer quite a pilot. It's worth noting that in 2019, the NOAA Preservation Fund, the current year, we spent all $1.5 million already on a 209-unit purchase by Aon, and the small medium multifamily pilot is committed while we work with the Land Bank and LISC on our partnership to identify potential projects to purchase. So this is money that we use, and as we've talked about in the Housing Policy and Development Committee, naturally occurring affordable housing is a very, very important place for us to be participating in the market. Minneapolis Homes, we are recommending $2 million one time. As Elfric Port, the manager of this section, likes to say, this is to buy, build, and rehab largely new construction homes on soon-to-be formerly single-family lots, owner-occupied 1 to 4. This leverages the asset of the hundreds of vacant lots that the city still owns and which cost us money to maintain. And it also leverages between $750,000 and $1 million from Minnesota Housing.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What strategic plan is there for filling the vacant lots in North Minneapolis?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, by strategic plan, do you mean how are we going about it, or why are we doing it, or?
Well, so thinking about as we're adding more money, like how does this connect to a larger picture of how we're delivering on the vacant lots? So like, is there an overall connectivity, vision, outcome? That's what I mean.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham. Minneapolis Homes, if this funding is approved, then we would bring forward the proposal for the criteria that we would propose to award these funds. And so that would establish the key priorities of the program and the strategy, I guess, in terms of what are the, there will be a balance, there will be a need to balance different sort of, policy priorities and different goals, a lot of which are articulated in the Minneapolis 2040 plan. But for example, the funds won't go as far if the priority is on longer term affordability. If the priority is on producing more units at a lower cost, then that would probably happen and there'd be fewer, long-term affordable units. So these are conversations that we'll be having and that we'll be bringing forward and making specific recommendations. The other thing that we are currently, that we're hoping to learn about is we just received proposals for the missing middle pilot, and that's, for infill development on, for the production of anywhere from 3 to 20 unit type developments. As you mentioned earlier, we don't have a lot of sort of, financial assistance available for that smaller scale development. So we're hoping to bring what we learned from that missing middle pilot about how to bring more affordability into some of that smaller scale development, and also incorporate that into some recommendations for Minneapolis Homes too.
Great.
But all of this will be before you, and there'll be discussions leading up to that.
Great. I think that just kind of what I have when I think about this investment, we talk about criteria and policy priorities. I think what we're missing is a higher level plan about how it all comes together and what are the outcomes. The fact that we as a city own so much land, that's a huge asset, and being able to leverage that to really impact wealth building opportunities in North Minneapolis. So just want to first name that as we're thinking about building out this program for next year. So is this funding for development gap assistance or affordability gap assistance for the home buyer?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham. It's for both. And if I might just respond to the comment that you just made, we have heard loud and clear that the council believes we could do a better job explaining how all of our interlocking investments that we recommend to you and programs that we recommend to you fit together. And we will, before long, be in front of the Housing Committee, but also coming around to talk to you about how all of our different programs and strategies and goals fit together. So didn't want to let that go without a chance to make an advertisement. But anyway, the answer to your question is it's both.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Schrader.
Well, on that note, I didn't want to let that point go. That is been a long frustration of mine. I think it's not, and I just want to point, at least for myself, it's not just how these very great programs work together and work to kind of hit all parts of the spectrum for housing, but also how does it hit the results? You know, I think what's hard about all these is these are fantastic programs that you're getting good results, but we aren't seeing, you know, how's this affecting the need? How should we be adjusting? Your 7 strategies are good, but what's the right mix? It's hard to see where we should be investing. I really appreciated the departments doing a lot of pilots to be able to say how we should adjust, but it seems a little bit premature when we don't know. We're trying to make sure that we're getting a certain AMI or housing in a certain area and really having this more comprehensive look at it. So I think besides saying how these programs work together, say what's that overall goal? Yep. How will we turn the corner? I think my final point on this, it feels like this is a very big shift for your department, and it seems to be the culture has been the city, you know, we depend so much on federal funding, we depend on state funding, and that has changed in the last decade. Like, we are not getting the funding we used to get from the feds or the state, and right now we have to think about how we can do with what we have, and that's the kind of information we're going to need to make those decisions.
Noted. Anybody else?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Stable homes, stable schools. We have spoken to the council and Chair Gordon's committee about it several times. The recommendation here is for $3.35 million one time, which continues the same amount of funding as was approved by the council for current year, 2019. Should it be approved for 2020, this will be the second of 3 years. And the good news this time is that the program exists, so we wouldn't be inventing it at the beginning of next year should the council approve this funding.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I'm just curious about the decision not to sort of project future spending on this, since the whole point is to keep kids in homes long enough to get through school without disruption. It feels like 1 year, one-time spending without sort of thinking about this as a part of our projected future spending would undermine the goal of the program.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, fair point. I would say that this was originally conceived by the department as a 3-year program, and the way the budgeting for it seemed wisest, given the scale of the request, was to do it as a series of one-time asks as opposed to ongoing, and then hopefully somebody remembers to turn it off, which is why it shows here as the one-time funding. However, at a policy level, I certainly take your point, and we've talked about this in Housing Committee repeatedly, that, well, I won't say too much more, but not having the out years programmed is, in this case, represents a budgetary, I'm not trying to lay it off on Micah, just on how it functions in our budget, as opposed to any sense that this is the right way to do it with an eye towards the future. Okay. Homeowner rehab, the request is for $750,000 of CDBG ongoing. This is an anti-displacement program which pays for necessary improvements for homeowners in homes. As you remember from last year, we are now doing this in-house. It serves homeowners below 80% of median family income, and the recommended change item doubles the number of households served. The Office to End Homelessness, or Heading Home Hennepin, the recommendation is for $50,000 ongoing. As you can see, our memorandum of understanding with Hennepin County is ending, so we need both a new agreement and presumably new funding. As you may remember, this was originally a city FTE, and now it's a county FTE. I should point out that some people remember it was $45,000, and it's shown here as $50,000. The tenant hotline at $125,000 one time, as distinct from the next one. This is where any renter can call for assistance, and this serves 3,000 tenants per year at this level. And if I may, I'll just flip ahead and show legal services for renter repairs. This is $100,000 one time, continuing the same amount of money from 2018 and current year in 2019. This is a strong partnership between us and regulatory services, and it serves about 225 renters per year in district court with legal services.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, if you could go back one more. Yes, so I see that Somali and Spanish, that there are tenant advocates. I'm curious, do you know if there's any support that they're looking at expanding to include the Hmong community as well?
Do we know as we're? I'm not sure if we know. Yeah. Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, can we follow up with you about that?
Yeah, no, I would
We're not sure.
appreciate that. We just have a lot of folks over in my ward who are Hmong, and I want to make sure that they can access the resources as well. Thank you.
Sure. Next, and we're getting there, appreciate everyone's patience, is the MPHA, or Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, energy efficiency improvements. This is recommended as $2.3 million one time. We've modeled it on an existing project that may come to us of 174 deeply affordable units, which would then leverage $19.4 million in other funding, reducing energy costs for the buildings we modeled by 40% and carbon footprint by 50%, and improves livability and accessibility for existing and future residents. So this is a sustainability, green building, affordability recommendation. The Low Barrier Housing Initiative, $250,000 one time. This is capital for development, combining housing with wraparound services to help transition people experiencing homelessness, with a focus on people experiencing unsheltered homelessness into permanent housing. And the last, it's our lowest priority, that's a joke, is an ongoing cut of $362,000 to CPED's general fund base budget. Happy to answer questions about that.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think either now or later be helpful to understand what that cut is cutting.
Yep.
And I also did want to note that something that is not included in the mayor's proposed budget or in the staff proposal is any expansion of the funds that we allocated for renter legal services beyond that one particular specific item. And I think this is a place where having some more outcome-based driving of the kind of budget proposals would be helpful. When New York City passed their right to counsel ordinance that gave all low-income tenants in the city legal protection in housing court, they saw 35% drop in eviction filings, which in Minneapolis would translate to 1,000 evictions never being filed if we had the same outcomes. And 80% of the people served in their program were able to stay in their homes, which would be 2,400 people in the city of Minneapolis staying in their homes. And so being able to compare those kinds of numbers to how much we're getting out of these, millions of dollars that we're spending in other ways would be helpful. And I know we will be tracking the outcomes from our own pilot here. But that is one where I think we're seeing cities really having a lot of impact with relatively low dollar numbers.
Madam Chair, Council President Bender, to the first part, your question about what is the cut to, the answer is that the recommended cut is sized to take into account specific things, but our understanding from the mayor's office and from the budget office is that it's not to cut those things, it's that in the spirit of the mayor's budget instructions this year to departments to contribute money towards specific change item requests. In addition to the $360 you see here, there's about another $350,000 of things that we think are a good idea and we will start doing or continue doing that are not covered in the enhancements for a total of about $700,000. So not sure exactly the right way to say this, but the things that this got sized to are not things we will stop doing. It's paying for ongoing programs that we value and we will keep doing.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the low barrier housing initiative, I think that this is really, really critical, and I'm grateful that we're focusing on folks who are unsheltered, experiencing unsheltered homelessness. I just want to name to my colleagues as well as staff to think long term around low barrier housing initiatives, to include folks who are coming out, who are returning to the community after being incarcerated, that we as a city really don't have a lot of supports around reentry. And so when we look at the entire public health approach to public safety, reentry is one of the ways that we can really focus on lowering someone's involved with crime in the criminal justice system. So when I read through the proposal and I saw low barrier housing, I kind of was like, oh, cool, maybe that's it. But I'm glad that we're focusing on the folks who really need it, but just want to name as well that there's serious needs for folks who are coming out of incarceration.
Madam Chair, if I may, Councilmember Cunningham, we've confirmed that the answer to your question about Hmong language services is yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does that conclude your presentation?
It does. Madam Chair, I have some nice words to say about my colleagues, but I'm happy to wait to say them until there are any more questions from you and your colleagues.
Are there other questions, comments, or thoughts as we've walked through the checkbook of one of our biggest departments here? None so far. Did you want to say a few closing words, please?
Yep. So, Chair Palmisano, that is the end of our presentation. A big thank you to CPED staff for all your work, including 3 divisions we didn't hear as much about this afternoon: Development Services, Director Steve Poore; Long Range Planning, Director Heather Worthington; and Operations, represented by Director Karuna Mahajan, who was right with me for the past weeks as we pulled this together for you. And to the committee, thank you for your time and attention. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to make a motion to receive and file the CPED department report. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you. We're going to move now to the Reg Services Department budget briefing. With us, we have Director Keller. We'll give her just a few moments to make that transition, although since, the slideshow on the computer there is continuous. Yep. It'll help in the transitions. Welcome, Director.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Chair Palmisano, council members, thank you for having me here today to talk about the Regulatory Services proposed 2020 budget. I am Kim Keller, the Regulatory Services Director. Regulatory Services is a department of 182 people in 5 divisions spread across 4 locations and 2 shifts. 2 of our divisions have regular hours at least 6 days a week. Our mission is to strengthen communities through partnerships with residents, neighborhoods, and businesses in order to make the city safer, healthier, and more inviting for all. We use engagement, education, and enforcement as methods to accomplish this mission. As a brief overview of our 2020 current service level, overall there is stability for regulatory services between the 2019 adopted budget and the 2020 current service level budget, accounting for salary and cost allocation growth. If you look at the housing inspection row, you'll see variability in the other funds category between the 2 years. This is due to a one-time addition of a $2 million rental repair revolving fund in the 2019 budget. There's also a slight reduction in traffic control due to 2019's one-time funding for a number of our part-time staff. Moving forward to our 2020 change items, my first item today is the phased sunset of the revolving fund, not the rental repair revolving fund I just mentioned, but the traditional one. As you know, historically, the department and city have relied on the Regulatory Services revolving fund for a variety of expenses, including staffing, contractor payments, and technology improvements. With the department's change in approach to a people-centered model and a strong economy, revenues into the fund have dropped over the past several years, while expenses were projected to remain steady. In short, we have an old funding model supporting a new business model. Over the past 3 years, the department has made strides in reducing the magnitude of the imbalance and shoring up the fund through one-time dollars. In 2019, we were aided in this effort through bridge funding, recommended by the mayor and approved by this council. This year's proposal takes significant steps toward resolving the imbalance by increasing the department's general fund appropriation by $537,000 and combining those dollars with $348,000 from vacant positions in the department, which we would then eliminate. Taken together, these steps would transition 8.5 positions out of the revolving fund. As part of the 5-year financial direction presented by the mayor, additional dollars are planned for 2021 to close out the fund. A multi-year phase-out means regulatory services can maintain 17 staff in their current positions, ensuring quality service throughout the department. Renters will benefit from continued ready access to inspectors, engagement, and administrative resources to address housing issues and concerns. In the 2019 budget, 2 new inspector FTEs were included. I held off on filling those positions while a long-term solution for the revolving fund was developed. As part of the 2020 budget, the mayor has recommended that those positions be filled, one as an inspector and the other a tenant navigator. As the department continues its arc towards engagement and support of renter rights, our tenant navigators work alongside our inspectors to increase housing stability by breaking down barriers and addressing systemic disparities in housing. Sometimes these are time-consuming cases involving multiple departments or jurisdictions. Other times they're relatively quick, like a recent case where a tenant navigator met with a resident at the government center and walked her over to housing court and legal aid so that she could meet with a legal aid attorney. Universally, it is the tenant navigator's ability to make a connection and to spend the extra time that is driving positive outcomes. While we are finalizing a way to better track these cases in Elms, our current records indicate around 50 tenant navigator cases thus far in 2019. In the future, we will also be able to report on the reason for the referral and case outcomes. Overall, this proposal is revenue neutral because the position was included in the 2019 budget. It's before you today only because of the need for a vehicle, which was not part of the previous award. Transitioning to traffic control, the proposal in front of you is to augment our part-time staffing. Days like yesterday, where there was a Vikings game, a Twins game, and an Open Streets event, show how critical these part-time staff are to city operations. With dual equity and economic inclusion impacts, part-time positions in traffic control have proven successful in maximizing our ability to provide smooth traffic flow for rush hour and special events, proactively manage neighborhood and parking issues, and provide an often-used employee pipeline into full-time positions. A relatively new program. For the first few years, part-time staff were funded with one-time dollars, and beginning in 2019 and continuing in 2020, some of those positions are converting into ongoing funding. This provides greater stability for the department and our city. Additional capacity is included through one-time dollars and recognition of increasing need for both intersection staffing and parking complaints. This proposal is funded in part through anticipated revenue from traffic control at construction sites and enforcement of meters, leaving the 2020 net impact at $392,000.
We have a question or comment from Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I put myself in queue earlier. Maybe I'll just make 3 quick comments. The first is, I just want to appreciate the care that you've taken, along with leadership in the department, to solve the structural problem in your budget, which was really not Reg Services' fault, so to speak, but rather just we're shifting kind of a philosophy of how we're funding this department, which I strongly support. And frankly, I just want to make sure that we have the resources that we need to make to meet all of the commitments that we've made to our community in making sure people are living in safe and stable housing. And while I understand the decision to hold off on hiring the tenant navigators, I'm a little disappointed just because of how much support was voiced in the council for this position, both last year and when we were adopting the renter first policy early last year. So going forward, I hope that we really are able to follow through on the things that are really highly prioritized and really strongly supported in the council. Because this transition will be ongoing for the department. And I hope you know that we have, when we make that commitment, I think you have the strong support of council members who are voicing those things at budget time and during policy. I also just wanted to note, since we're on this slide now, we're hearing more and more about sort of the interaction between rec services, traffic control, and then kind of our overall, how we're enforcing things in the streets. We're hearing a lot of complaints about parking in the bike lanes on 311, especially I think when new facilities are going in, where people are just getting used to it or there's need to shift the design. And then some conversation about how we're using resources about off-duty versus on-duty traffic control for our ramps. So I just wanted to highlight that those are conversations that I know council members are asking about. And if you want to comment now, it's fine, or not. I think there's follow-up to be had. So thank you.
Certainly. Chair Palmisano, I would be happy to respond to either or both of those comments.
Sure, now's a good time.
Now would be the time. In terms of, thank you, Chair Palmisano, Councilman Bender, thank you for the comments. In terms of the positions that were delayed in their being filled, and how are we going to allocate resources going forward? In addition to a study that is being funded by the Family Housing Fund to look at our tiered inspection system and cycle, we're also building out our renter first implementation priority areas. And we're not pausing on in-flight work. We are still doing policy and implementation work on new ordinances. We're still doing TRAs. Tenant navigator work is happening, and we're continuing to build up our cultural agility within the department, so we're not pausing. At the same time, we are stepping back, and we're talking with internal and external stakeholders about what Renter First means and building buy-in around that. And so we're asking for their ideas. We're asking what would have the greatest impact. We're asking how they could see themselves partnering with us in this work. And through this assessment, between the study and the Renter First assessment, I'm confident that we'll have a well-rounded understanding of the priorities, of the trade-offs, and of the resources we have available and what we'll need going forward. In terms of traffic control and the evolving conversation around that, we do have some work to do around understanding what role traffic control could play in the city going forward. We also have some work to do in better understanding the impact of the decisions that we've already made. And so I have analysts pulling data and doing work right now to better align and understand what our staffing hours are and have been historically up against the complaints that they are handling through 311 and how that and the intersection hours, and trying to look at that relationship between them. I will say I believe that we've only made it this far with the quality of service we've had because of the part-time employees and the flexibility that allows us. Okay.
Thank you.
My final proposal today focuses on shelter needs at Minneapolis Animal Care and Control. Day-to-day needs of the 3,500 animals taken in annually cannot be postponed. Every day, animals in the shelter must be fed, cared for, and have their cages cleaned. This work requires more time than the current animal care technicians have, meaning that others are stepping in, from the director on down. Two critical roles that spend substantial time on this work are the surgical vet tech and the volunteer coordinator. With the animal care technician position filled and their time refocused on their primary duties, we will be able to offer surgeries more frequently and increase our engagement efforts. In fact, there are multiple rippling effects throughout the shelter with this additional position. With more frequent surgery, we can reduce the overall amount of time an animal spends in the shelter before being adopted or transferred over to a rescue organization. Shorter average stays also will reduce the shelter's kenneling expenses. And since MAX subsidizes the cost of the surgery and does not pass it along to either adopting individuals or rescues, completing more surgeries in-house is an economic inclusion tool. More frequent surgery also improves health outcomes. Animals get needed care more quickly. It allows MAX surgeons to handle a greater number of complex or long surgeries, which also have longer post-op recovery times, and it provides minimal disruption since these additional surgeries can happen in-house. With the time allocated differently in the shelter, we can also expect an increased number of low-cost vaccination clinics, more hours spent with those who come to the shelter to adopt animals in order to better match them, and a safer and more responsive shelter experience by expanding the hours when a technician is on duty and assigned specifically to the kennels.
Councilmember Cunningham?
So I'm already kind of getting teary-eyed a little bit. I love the MACC a whole bunch. I really support this item, but as you're going through and talking about all of the amazing work, you have wonderful leadership in the MACC, and I have now adopted 2 dogs from this wonderful organization. Pancake, who is now Beefcake. She is doing really well, and she was a beneficiary of all of these wonderful services. I got to see she was really scared of humans, which is why she was Pancake, because she would lay with all 4 paws splayed out on the ground. And I got to see the amazing folks there who provided her wonderful service. She was really, really sick when she first got there, and how they spent so much time invested in her well-being and her physical and emotional wellness. And she's doing so well, and she's a part of our pack now. And so I'm really grateful to see more investment in this particular division within your department, because they're doing really phenomenal work. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Councilmember Goodman?
Well, that was awesome. It's great to have an ally working in animal control, and Councilmember Johnson has also been a great ally for animal control. A couple years back, the previous director had asked for about 5 FTEs. At the time, we were able to fund 2. We brought in a veterinarian. I think that was an incredibly good call. I'm wondering, I hate to ask this, but I'm wondering if 1 is enough. I understand that the people who are doing the field work are really stressed, and maybe next to children, people who have lost dogs, roving animals, and animal-related problems, including all of the calls we get on wildlife. If you had not thought through whether or not potentially we should also have another animal control officer out in the field. That seems to be a touch point for emotion as well when people are in the community. So if we were able to, what are you thinking? What would be your next request after the vet tech?
Councilmember Palmisano, Councilmember Goodman. With this, we feel like the shelter will be in a much stronger place than it was when previous director came and asked for 5 FTEs. And the next attention would shift over to the field. We currently have 9 officers covering 2 shifts and multiple, overnight calls as well. Those are the same officers doing that. And it is extremely challenging work, both in terms of the physicality of it and the emotion of it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions and thoughts? I really like, and there weren't a lot of questions about your revolving fund conversation, but I don't want to let that seem insignificant. That's been a huge lift over multiple years, and I really appreciate your taking the time to go through it. You were succinct, but there was a lot in there. Are there any other questions or thoughts for Director Keller? Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you. I actually did want to follow up because we talked a lot about the domestic violence program that the MACC carries out, and so I'm curious. Is that ongoing funding? Is that from the general fund? How does that program still exist?
I'll step aside and let Director Harefield answer this.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. City Council Member Cunningham. It is actually funded through MAC absorbs it out of our funds. So there is no special funding for it at all.
And could you just explain for the record for maybe those who don't understand what that program is?
So we do it on 3 different ways. If you are a person who's experiencing domestic violence and you need to get out of your home, often the suspects will utilize animals to maintain control over people. And in fact, we've actually had several cases where animals were killed in those situations. So MAC will provide a safe haven for those animals to come free of charge for up to 10 days. Sometimes it's been extended, but for 10 days, completely free of charge, we provide all the vet care for the animal while he's there. And a lot of people don't know our standard practice for us to every animal that walks through our door gets all of their immunizations to protect the herd health. Often there's volunteers that work with us that will come into special areas of the shelter so that the animals has the mental stimulation that they need and care. And this can go on. We've had them there. We had one there for 30 days. So it can go on for a long period of time. But the animal is basically put under our protective custody. And then when I say, I mean, it is these people come into our building sometimes to try to get at the animal. So it is a kind of a dangerous situation. We will also do free kenneling if the police call us or EMS or fire calls us because you've had a medical event and you've been rushed to the hospital and there's no family to care for your pet that's still being left in the house. Officers often go out after hours to pick those animals up, and they're also put in our protective custody, and we kennel those for free as well. So we do a lot for the community to try to help people who are really in need. We've had houses that have burnt down where we kept birds and all kinds of weird animals free of charge while they found placement. So.
Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate that explanation. I think that program, again, when we look at public safety overall, I think that program is a really critical piece. And also, just generally speaking, abuse to animals is usually something that's connected to other criminal acts, whether it's domestic violence or whatever the case may be. So I do believe that this is a really critical component of not only the love and safety of our animals, but also the larger picture of the public health approach to public safety. So thank you for that.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kind of echoing what you said earlier, I just want to thank you, Director, and all of your staff for making such a big transition this year with the budget at the same time that you're taking on new work and rethinking existing work and showing a lot of creativity and leadership in a department that I think one could think about as just like enforcing the rules. You've gone way beyond that into so many creative areas of work that I think are really enhancing our community, and it shows up in how you've presented this solution to the budget gap, but it shows up in so much of the work as well. So thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
If there are no more questions, I'll just close out and thank all the regulatory services directors and leadership and staff for their contributions every day and for helping to pull all this together. There's a lot of hands in putting this together, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. With that, I will move the Regulatory Services Department 2020 budget briefing. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you, everyone, for being here to walk through these budget items. We're going to end a little early today. We are adjourned.